Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Arcade Club, where it is our distinct pleasure to host today one of the true legends in the games industry. I could reel off his many accolades, or we can sit down and talk about them right now for your pleasure. So, without further ado, please welcome to the stage, Mr. John Romero.
Yo.
That's a deep chair.
All right. Wow, these are some deep chairs. Just sit back, fall asleep. No.
Cool. John, welcome to Arcade Club.
Thank you for having me.
It seems quite apt to have you here in the arcade because, of course, it's well known that it was in the arcades that your love of video games first blossomed. So I'm curious, what was it about them that first drew you into their dark and dingy halls and kept you there?
The dark and dingy halls. Well, geez, before that I was watching TV, cartoons and all that. And, you never had any control over what was on the TV, but it was cool to see in an arcade a TV set that had something completely different on it that was not, a movie or a TV show or whatever. So it was really cool to see that and to play and control that. And then when Pong came out, it was the same thing. It was like, oh my God, we're playing games on TV sets. So I thought that was amazing, and that was like, this is way cooler than a show. Way cooler than a TV show, way cooler than the movie. I love playing video games. They cost 25 cents back then. It was a lot of money. But I just got addicted to them. I spent every penny I had on video games.
And what were some of your favorites from that time?
Jeez, so many. I used to play in tournaments back then. And my favorite game was Pac-Man, which I could play like the first 2 or 3 screens without even looking at the screen. Just talking to friends, just get through the first couple screens. That's how much money I spent on Pac-Man. And I made my own patterns too. Back then, they sold tons of books that were all about patterning video games, like how to get through each level exactly with the right movements and all that. But I didn't need to read any Pac-Man books. I just made them myself. But Asteroids and Crazy Climber was one of my favorite games. Donkey Kong, obviously, was such a great game. Tempest, you name it. I could non-stop name for hours all the games from the 80s. I remember all of them.
Now, most people that play games don't then go, you know what, I'm going to make games. What was it that made you make the leap from game player to game maker?
Well, it is a funny story. It's very unexpected, but it costs a lot of money to play video games. And I was, 10, 11 years old, 9 years old, playing these games. And one day my friend and my brother came riding to the house on their bikes, and they said, oh my God, we found a place where we can play video games with no money. And I'm like, no way. So I got on my bike, followed them all the way to the local college. And they drove the bikes up to the computer science lab, and this is in the summertime where it's like super hot out. It's like 40 outside, and inside is like 18. And we rode our bikes up there. I'm like, this is a weird arcade. So we go inside, and there's not that many people there, but there were a bunch of computer terminals in a room, which I didn't even know what any of this stuff was. And another room was a giant computer that these were all connected to. It was a mainframe, and there was almost no one else in there, and my friend had access to this mainframe through an account from a next door neighbor. So he got on it, and he started showing me these text games, like Hunt the Wumpus and Poison Cookie and Star Trek, and like these really simple NIM, very simple logic puzzle games, and eventually Adventure, the original Colossal Cave Adventure. But he showed me these games, and there was like nothing in the arcade. And I was like, okay, there's no graphics, but it looks interesting, and I don't have to put money in, and I don't have to hurry for the next move. So it was like, this is another kind of game, because I played a lot of card games, I played a lot of board games, arcade games were like the new thing, and now this is computer games. So it was really interesting, and then we kept on coming every day to the lab, and I started noticing that there were students in there and they're typing on them. It's like, and I asked, what are they typing? He said, they're writing the stuff that you're playing. They're writing games. So I'm like, I want to do that now. So I basically started asking the students what they were typing and writing it down until they finally got fed up with that. and they gave me a book, an HP Basic book, and I could just experiment on a computer on my own. How do I make games? And so I just started learning how to program a really simple adventure game, with in BASIC with like the line number and print whatever, like you're in a dingy hole or whatever, and I just started making my first games, teaching myself at a college when I was 11, and I just basically kept on doing that until I had to go to computer stores and use all different kinds of computers. They all had BASIC in it, luckily. Until it took 3 years for my parents to finally get a computer in the home, which back then it was really rare to have a computer in the home. So when I first got on a computer, it was in 79. That was on the mainframe, and in '82 we finally got a computer, and then it was like, I'm done going outside. So I used to be a normal kid until we got a computer in the house.
It's great, it's great. And of course, like most people, like you say, you're in school at that point. You spent your entire teenage years making games. What were some of the favorite games that you made during those early years when you were cutting your teeth in games making?
Most of the games that I made I really liked, even though most of them were trash. They were just learning experiences. I usually picked a thing I wanted to learn how to do, and I would make a little bitty game just to learn how to do that thing, which could be, I want to read the joystick and use the joystick to make something move on the screen. And then I'd get that working, I'd make a little game out of it and call it done, and then I would go, okay, next game I want to have some sound effects. And I would keep the joystick stuff, and then I would like write a new game, and each time I'm writing a whole thing. I'm not like using the old stuff, because I want to experiment with how do you even like write a main loop for a game. What other ways can I make a main loop? And sometimes I would find a little shred of assembly language to do some sound or something, and then I would just incorporate that into it. So I really was learning all kinds of stuff about it, and I would just make little games that were focused on a certain either programming idea or game design idea. And I decided at some point, I was making so many of these, I was like, I should just do the alphabet. So I started coming up with, for A, Alien Attack, and B is Bongos Bash, and C is Cavern Crusaders, and so I basically was going through the whole alphabet, Dangerous Dave, I just had tons of games, just as learning things, and I was like, the next letter, what's the next one going to be? But I did make a ton of games, and by the time I got to Wolfenstein, let's say, in '92, Wolfenstein was my 87th game. So I'd made tons of games before, and I sold, at least half of those games.
Brilliant. And at what point, because like you said, you were so prolific, was there a point when you thought, hold on a minute, I can make a career out of this? Or was it just all bubbling over the passion for playing them and making them?
I knew I was going to do it immediately, basically, because when I finally got a computer and I could actually get discs and play games on my computer, I saw that, wow, lots of other people are doing this already on the computer. And so I saw people's names, the programmers' names, the company that they were published through. I remembered the dates. I remember everything about the style of the way that programmer coded his stuff. So I knew like I want to be like the people that made these games that I'm playing constantly. So I would do a lot of game playing and then programming, and I'm trying to move ahead because I need to be as good as the stuff that I'm playing, because there's no other exposure for me. I never bought any of those games. They're all pirated. But that's how I got to learn. But it was all about just I want to be like Dan Gorlin, who made Choplifter, or Doug Smith, who made Lode Runner, and 1982, 1983, and these games just keep going through the years, and just trying to catch up to the state of the art, which always advanced. So it's like I am in school. It's really hard for me to spend all my hours programming because I'm actually in school, in high school, or usually I did most of my programming in high school, like actually at school. So I didn't study. I didn't actually pay attention to anything in class.
It's a good job it worked out there.
I got horrible grades. Don't do that.
So by the time you actually came to Softdisk, you were pretty much a veteran, given that you'd made so many games. And of course, Softdisk was, I like to think of it as the petri dish that would go on to create id Software. When you first met the team at Softdisk, did you know, right there and then, this is a really talented bunch of guys that we can do something special with?
Yeah, it was instantaneous, pretty much. Before Softdisk, I got my first break in the industry at a company called Origin Systems, which made the Ultima series of games from a Calibeth in 1980 all the way up through Ultima, Ultima Online, and so I that was the only place I wanted to work. There were some other game companies that were amazing, but some of them were out of business because of the crash of '83. But Origin was still around. I really wanted to work there, and my first job was at Origin in '87. And when I left Origin, I co-founded a company. It was my second game company after Origin, so it was in 1988.
And how old were you then?
I was 21.
Second company at 20. That's pretty good going.
I started my first one when I got the computer at home in '82. So that was my first game company, and then the second one was right after Origin, and that was with my manager, boss person from Origin. We started a company together, and then I left there, started another company with another programmer, and then we went to Softdisk, and so when we started id at Softdisk, id was actually my fourth game company. And I'd already sold a lot of stuff through the previous companies, but they weren't like known companies, except for the second one. I did the Commodore 64 version of Might and Magic 2. So we took the Apple II version, we ported it for New World Computing back then in 1988. But when I hired Carmack, both of them, I brought Adrian in from the art team. Adrian was an artist intern in the next room. I had started a group called Gamer's Edge to deliver games every 2 months. Before Gamer's Edge, I was delivering a game or a tool, utility kind of thing, every single month. And I did that for a year and a half. And I was just like, I just want to make games. I want to spend longer than a month on a game. And I told the president of the company, and he said, okay, let's do this. And I said, I need a team of people. Like, if I could have 3 people or 4 of us, that would be really cool. And if I could do 2 months. And so he agreed to that. And for me, I'm just like, I was delivering stuff 1 person every month. 4 people every 2 months is crazy town. That's like 8 times cooler. So like, no way are you going to find anybody delivering games every 2 months now. But back then, we could do it. And anyway, when I got us together in a room, the first thing that we had to do, I was excited to work as a team with somebody else because I'd never worked together with anybody, and neither did anyone else. Like, at the time, '80s was all about a programmer just doing everything by themselves. The whole game industry was started by lone indies, really, out of their homes, sending their games to these brand new publishers that were publishing indie stuff, which happens now all the time. But that's how the industry started. I got all 4 of us together, and before we could work together, we had to make 2 games in 1 month. It's like, that's not the deal, but they needed to put out a disc that was just a demo, a free disc that showed what people could get for every issue of Gamer's Edge. So John Carmack and I, this was the first time we were like making something together in the same room. He ported a game that he had made called Catacomb from the Apple II. He was porting it to the PC, and I just decided I'm gonna take my Dangerous Dave game from 2 years earlier, and I'm gonna port that to the PC as well. And so I told him, it sucks, but we have to go really, really fast to get a really good game that people hopefully will want to subscribe to this disc for. And the best way to do that is we can't be creative. We just take something that we already were creating and making, and just port it. Just do the programmer part of it, not the creative fun part of it. It is fun programming, don't get me wrong. But it was like, go as fast as possible. So that first month, which was in August of 1990, we basically were in this, it's a 10 by 10 room, it's dark, we're just playing heavy metal, the lights are out, and we're on really good machines back then, 386 33s, and we were just like living programming in that room for the entire month, weekends, you name it, nonstop. And it was like, this guy is as dedicated as I am. This is awesome because John Carmack is a machine. And so he was there all the time. And I was just like, this is great. I found somebody who's just awesome at programming and just really fast and wants to do this all the time like I have been since I was, 1979. So I was really excited that after we were done doing that, which we actually did, even before the month was over, we got it done, and with a program that could let you select it and read text about the game that you're going to run. We got all that stuff done. And then on September 1st, we're going to make a game together, and decided to make a game called Slordax, which is, of course, an 80s type name, something crazy. And it was going to be a vertically scrolling game. Like if any of you have seen Xevious, which is probably in the building, we were going to make a Xevious type game. That's a vertically scrolling game. So the background would move down, would scroll behind you, and you're just kind of in all over the screen, just shooting up everything. And on the PC, moving the screen vertically could take a bit of time. So John, I gave him this book that Michael Abrash had written. Michael Abrash is like a programming god. And he had written a book that tells you everything that you could possibly know about the graphics adapter that's in every PC. So I gave it to John because I asked him, what do you want to do? And this was like, I had no idea that this was like the critical turning point for decades. This question, what do you want to do? And he says, I really like working on the structure of the game, and I'm really interested in graphics. So I said, okay, I'll do everything else. You focus on those things, and then I'll do the game design. I'll do the level design. I will write the tools. I will write gameplay code if I need to. I will do the mastering for production to get this thing on an actual disk and out and duplicated and all that. So he didn't have to deal with any biz stuff or anything that was outside of that. And that was great because he could just focus on this task, which was, okay, a smooth scrolling background. And what he did was he learned how to use that video card at the lowest level that nobody else on the PC had done. And this had been 9 years since the PC had been in existence. August of '81 is when the original PC XT came out. In 9 years, nobody had done anything that John was starting to do, which was smoothly scrolling the background like you would see on a Commodore or an Atari 800, which actually has hardware made to do that. PCs didn't, or at least people didn't think it did. And so he discovered how to make that background move smoothly like a Nintendo, which is like subpixel smooth, not just like a dot moving down, but like the subpixel. You can't even, it's hard to say, unless you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. At a smooth 70 frames a second, I think it was at that time, because CRTs were at 70 frames versus 60 when LCDs came in the picture. So he got that going, and I was like, wow, that is really cool. And I thought that was, I knew that he was accessing what are called the CRTC address registers that tell the video card where in memory to start looking at the next line. And so he was feeding data into basically into the bottom of the screen as the top of it is just scrolling. And so he came up with a really interesting method for doing that, and I thought that was just really cool. And I told him, that's great, but what's really great, like the thing that destroys everything, is horizontal scrolling. That's the really hard part. Because if you know anything about video memory and how video memory works on a computer, horizontal scrolling is way harder than vertical scrolling, no matter what the system is. So it was like a challenge. But I was just like, but yeah, we get this game done, and we'll figure out, maybe we'll do that later. And it was like 5 days later. I came into the office, and I just thought everything was just like going normal like the day before, but evidently John and Tom were up all night until 5 in the morning, because John had his breakthrough at around 10 p.m. And this is at work, because we just worked all the time. And so he had this breakthrough, and Tom came in the room, and he was the game designer guy. He was actually in a totally different department at the company, but because we're making games, that's all he cares about. He would come in after work and help make games. That's how excited he was about it. So it was like yet another super dedicated person, just kind of being being attracted to this what we were doing. So yeah, so Tom said, wouldn't it be funny if we made a demo of Super Mario Brothers 3, which was playing on a Nintendo in the corner? What if we made a demo of the first level? Because John had horizontal scrolling working. So John's like, yeah, let's do it. So Tom was up all night making the graphics and making the level with my level editor. And John took my little Dangerous Dave character from the previous month to have a character run around. And Tom thought, why don't I call it Dangerous Dave in copyright infringement? Because it's Dangerous Dave in Mario World, which will never work. So I saw a disc on the computer that said, run me. And I'm like, okay, I wonder if this is, it's not going to be that. And so I just put it in the computer and I ran it, and Super Mario 3 basically comes up on the screen, and I was just like, wow. And as soon as it was already had a demo mode and everything, like you could just sit there watching the characters move around before pressing a button to get in. And as soon as the screen scrolled smoothly, I was just like destroyed, mentally destroyed. Like I knew everything that the PC could do. I'd been studying it for 2 years at that time, and no one had ever done this before. And making a horizontally scrolling game is way more, it's a much bigger market than any vertical scrolling game was. So when I saw that, I couldn't work for 3 hours. There's no way I could do anything on the computer. I was blown away like nothing that has ever happened to me in my life. And it was just like, immediately it was just like, we're leaving. We have to go. This company doesn't know anything about this. I mean, it can't do anything with this. Like, it doesn't have a market that this should be reaching. So when they came in at like 10 in the morning, they come in, or no, it was like 1 in the afternoon because they'd been up extra late. They came in and they're like, yeah, was that pretty cool? I'm like, oh my God, you have no idea. And I said, we're out of here, guys. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, no, I'm serious. We're leaving this company. We have to start our own company. And so this guy, Jay, who was the head of one of the departments down the hallway, I'd known him since 1986. So I'd known him for like 4 years at this time. He came in, and I just said, we're leaving, dude. Like, and he's like, no way. So we closed the door, and I basically just told them, we have to do this. And so the initial plan was, yes, we're going to start a company, given. Next, we're going to take this Mario prototype, basically, that they made, and we're going to do a couple levels of the full Super Mario Bros. 3 and send it to Nintendo. Maybe they will want us to put Mario on a PC, because it's just as great as the Nintendo version. It's exact, So we basically said, let's do this, over a week after work. So we start work at 10 in the morning, and we finish normally at 6, and then that's when we switch to the other directory, and then we start working on the Mario demo until about 2 in the morning. So this is how we work for like a whole week, and also like over the weekend. So we actually had it 2 weekends. We started really on a Friday, and it was like, wow, so lucky we're starting on a Friday. Everybody leaves the company at 6. We take all the computers out of our office into the car, drive them over to the house, because we didn't have computers like this. These are really good computers. And we take them to the house, and then we don't need to sleep all weekend because we're like slamming on this Mario game. Tom is drawing all the graphics. We are programming Goombas in and flying and everything that you see in the first level. And we did this over 1 week. And at the end of it, we sent it to Nintendo of America, and they sent it to Japan. And then word got back, great job, guys, but we're not putting Mario on anything but our own hardware. So it's just like, okay, we'll just use this tech for another game. And at that exact weird timing, same time, I was being contacted by Scott Miller at Apogee, who wanted us to make a game, because he'd seen one of my previous games I'd put on the PC, and he wanted me to make something like that for his company that did this thing called Shareware, which really was brand new and no one had heard of. And so I trusted that he knew what he was doing marketing, and I said, yeah, let's do this. And I showed him the Mario demo, and his brain was destroyed as well. And so I said, we need $2,000 up front, and he's like, no problem. Sent us $2,000. I'm like, all right, we're doing this. So we told him over the phone what the game's going to be. Tom came up with the idea. Well, actually, John Carmack came up with the initial idea of, what if we just have a genius kid who saves the universe and his parents don't even know? And so Tom's like, yes! And so Tom comes up with the whole Commander Keen name and the backstory and everything. And we read it to Scott over the phone. He thinks it's amazing. Let's start doing this. And around 20th of September is when we basically start working on Commander Keen. And less than 3 months later, we ship the game. We ship 3 games. We ship Keen 1, 2, and 3 as a shareware trilogy. Upload the first one, buy the second 2, and it exploded. It was so massive, and it was just like a grassroots thing. We just put it out there on a BBS that everybody basically in the United States would call this BBS. And as soon as you logged in, it just said Commander Keen, download it. And so it spread like wildfire everywhere. And after 1 month of sales, Scott Miller sends us a check. We're like, all right, we got like a 45% royalty rate or something. We got like $10,500. I'm like, it sold over 20,000 and no one has heard of the game. I'm like, we're now leaving. That's more money than we need to survive right now, so we can quit. So that's what we basically did. We quit and we started id Software February 1st of 91 because we wanted to make sure that we kind of got done. We got done with our latest game, and we were actually started on another game, and we made a deal with them because I started this whole game disc that people have paid for a year of these games, and we're leaving after like 2 games. So I made a deal with the owner. We'll keep doing this for another entire year for you, but not here. We'll do it at our own company, and we'll just send you the games every couple months, and we'll make our own stuff as well. So that's what we did. 1991 was like the craziest year at id. We made 13 games in 1991.
It's a lot of games. And of course, some of those games were where you started to play around with 3D, which would then, of course, lead to Wolfenstein, which was a bit of a game changer.
Yep.
What was it like working on Wolfenstein, and how did the idea and conception of it come about?
Well, when we, Christmas of 1991, normally Christmas we all take 2 weeks off, and we come back on January 1st or 2nd, whatever, and then we start working on whatever the next thing is. Just this is what happened like the last 2 years. So at 91, we finished another trilogy of Commander Keens, Keen 4, 5, and 6, and 4 was put out there for free for everybody to just download and play and have fun. This is way before, like decades before people actually got games for free. And because our games were really good, starting with Wolfenstein, that's when the whole game industry had to start putting games on CDs, on magazines, because they needed to just show people what their games were like. Because other than our games, you would just go into the store and look at boxes and go, I really hope it looks like this and it's fun, and then you pay money and then it's horrible. So so we made these 3 Commander Keen games. One of them was going to the store, the other ones were going into shareware. We had also, at the end of November, just finished making our second 3D game called Catacomb 3D, which was the very first texture mapped 3D shooter game. And it was in EGA mode, which is 16 colors. It was still kind of a fun game, but it didn't feel great. It didn't feel like a badass game. So when we've just been used to making these Keens. We just like made 3 Keens for 1990. For 1991, we made another 3 Keens, and in January we started making Keen 7. So we're planning on making Keen 7, 8, and 9. And it was just like, oh God, okay. So we started making Keen 7. It was a tech demo for parallax scrolling in VGA, and it actually looked really good. But one night I was just like, you know what? I'm just sick of Keen. It was 1 in the morning. Like we worked all the time. So it was 1 in the morning, and I just say to everyone, you know what? I'm just tired of making Commander Keen. I've just had enough. And Adrian's like, yeah, I hate Keen. And Tom Hall, this is his baby. He's the creative director. This is like he is Commander Keen. Tom Hall is Commander Keen. And so he's just like, he just sees like carnage happening, and he's just like, guys, okay, so we've been making too many Keens. So what are we gonna do now? And I said, we need to be making 3D games. Keen is more 2D stuff. Even if it's VGA, it's not better than arcade games. Like, we need to do something that is like Catacombs 3D is getting close, and I bet that we could do much better on the next game. but not have to worry about time. Because with Catacomb 3D, it was yet another 2-month game. We made the first texture map 3D game in 2 months. And the game that we made half a year before that, the first 3D game we made was called Hover Tank 1, and it was made in 2 months as well. So it's like, what if we make a 3D game, but we don't have a time limit on it? We just spend as much time as it takes to make it as great as we can. And so Tom, being the creative director, is like, okay, well, what if we do this? And he basically puts out a game design idea that was kind of like Hover Tank 1, just with guns. And I was just like, that's not exciting. That's not different. That's not like really, something that'll like surprise people. And I don't know why, but just like it just popped into my head, what if we remade Castle Wolfenstein in 3D? And that sounds weird to anybody who doesn't know that there was actually an original Castle Wolfenstein in 1981, and then a sequel in 1984 called Beyond Castle Wolfenstein. But for us, they were the biggest games in the whole industry. Like, they were huge. And Castle Wolfenstein is recognized as the first stealth game, really, because you would sneak around, you would like take guards' uniforms and try and get past the SS without them noticing, and just try and get through there, because it's hard to get through this castle and escape without getting killed, because it was 1 or 2 shots and you're just gone. So so we remember how great that game was. Like, everything about that game, when I said we redo Castle Wolfenstein, it was like, that means we do voices, that means we have like suspense, we have characters following you, like all of the different things that were in that game. And it was immediately, oh my God, that's what we need to do. Everybody just like immediately said yes, because we knew what the game was all about already. So we trashed that VGA version of Keen, immediately start making Wolfenstein in 16 color, because we're kind of going off the Catacombs 3D code. And after we start doing that, we're starting to come up with all the ideas for it. Tom's coming up with all the ideas because he's the creative director, and I'm having to modify our tools to be able to handle making the maps, because we need a lot more information in them. And at some point, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to tell Scott, because Scott is our publisher, and he was expecting Commander Keen, and he knew we were starting on it. So he told Scott, and I was just like, oh yeah, dude, so we're going to make a totally different game. It's going to be 3D, and he had seen Catacomb, and he's like, oh my God, yes. I was hoping you guys would do something with 3D, so it was like, yeah, we're going to make a game where you're just blowing away Nazis. It's going to be awesome. He's like, yeah, go ahead, whatever you guys are going to make. And so we didn't work crazy hours. It was not like the previous year, which was insane. It was all hours, basically. It was like, we're going to spend the time on this game. We don't have to get it done in 2 months. We can spend our time and do everything right. And when it feels like that's enough, then we'll kind of finish it. And we decided that, with shareware, there's 3 episodes. 1 is free and the other 2 you buy. And so Scott is the one who came up with this whole idea, and that's what he's expecting. And we're getting close to, May. We're in April. And Scott's like, he's very excited to get this game out, because he's seen it, and he's just like, people are going to be just destroyed when they see Wolfenstein. Like, we were getting the digital sound in the game, and I'm just like on the floor rolling. It's so funny to hear like Nazis getting shot with a chain gun for the first time in history. And so it was just amazing making this game, and I knew everyone was going to love it. And Scott basically said, hey guys, I got an idea. How about you make 6 episodes at 60 levels, and then I can sell it in different ways. I can like sell for $35 the first trilogy, and for $15, less than half, you double the amount of levels, and then people pay $50 for this stuff. And then what if you guys make a hint book, and that's $10 more, and it's covering all 60 levels. So if you didn't buy all of them, now you want to buy the rest of them because you got a hint book that covers 60 levels. So he masterminded this crazy pricing plan, and now it's like, well, we're going to get done with this trilogy. Like, we're done next week. And so he's just like, yeah, that's okay. We just won't sell. We won't send them out. We'll send out the ones that are just people ordering the trilogy, but for all 6, we'll send that when you guys are done. But you got to get it done really, really fast. And I said, well, how fast? And he's like, probably about another month and a half or something like that. So I'm like, wow. So we'd spent 4 months making the shareware version of Wolfenstein. We actually hadn't made the other 2 episodes in the first 3. We were just getting the shareware version done. We still have to make the other 2 episodes, and then he wants 3 more on top of that. So we're looking at 50 more levels, because every episode had 10 levels in it, and he wants it done in like within 2 months. And he's like, "Can you guys do that?" So I was just like, "What do you think, Tom?" And he's like, "Yeah, we probably can." All right. So I just said, "Okay, yeah, I think we can get 50 more levels and a hint book done in 2 months." So yeah, so we're gonna have to now we have to start crunching basically, and so he's all excited. We actually upload the shareware version of Wolfenstein at 4 a.m. on May 5th. It's been tested like crazy. Scott and George, who run Apogee, they came over to our apartment at 4 in the morning. They were there earlier, but checking everything out. Okay, let's upload it. Scott signs into his account on Software Creations and gets it uploaded. And the sysop is, Dan Linton there. He knows it's coming and he gets it all ready. And like the whole thing blows up the next day. It's the biggest thing that's ever happened, on that BBS. And Tom and I are just like working, and it wasn't long. It was just like maybe a couple weeks before Scott's like, so we haven't sold anything but the full version. Like there's nothing to send out. We can't send the three episode version out. Everybody wants all of it. $60 the whole game. So we're just like, oh my God, we have to go faster. So Tom and I, when we had come down to visit them and decide to move to Texas, we got to see their cars, and they had some really cool cars because it was just those two making money off all of our games. So, so they bought some cool stuff, and George Broussard bought this Acura NSX. It was like $75,000, really nice car. And so Tom loved that car. That was the car that Tom wanted to get. So while we're making, in the future, we're now making Wolfenstein levels as fast as we can. And when Tom's not, he's just not, like, making those levels is probably the most boring levels we've ever made because Wolfenstein levels are not exciting to make. They're too simple. Wolfenstein, Commander Keen was actually way more exciting making those levels. But we knew we had to grind them out. They still have to be exciting. They have to be really good, but like, oh God. So he would just start getting bored, start playing Super Nintendo or Neo Geo or whatever. And I'd like, come on, Tom, NSX, NSX, NSX. He's like, okay, I'll get back on my computer. So we finally did it. We finally got the 50 levels made. We wrote the hint book, which was probably one of the most fun parts of making Wolfenstein, was writing that hint book. It was hilarious. And we got it done in a month and a half. So we got it done under the time that we told them. And it was the first month it sold 4,000 copies, and no one had heard of it. So it was just like, wow, this blows away anything we've done before. So yeah, it was really, really good.
And then, of course, it was time to make the game that would allow you to buy your own really nice car. Obviously, you made games in between Doom and Wolfenstein, but then the idea for Doom comes along. And when did that idea first come to you, and what was it like starting to develop it as the idea started to germinate?
So we had been playing Dungeons and Dragons for years, like basically since Carmack came to Soft Disk. He brought a giant D&D table. That was his home table. That's his computer table. That's his dinner table. That's his everything table. And so when he moved into the lake house, he put the table there. Everything went in the lake house. And the lake house is where we did all of our work. That's where the software was in this giant lake house. It's like 3,000 square foot house. And so John's giant table was there, and he's a dungeon master. He's amazing at it. He had a world running for years at this point. Tons of characters, like hundreds of characters. It was a very deep political game that he had running. And we jumped into it as soon as we got there. And it's like, oh my God, you do D&D? Awesome, let's go. So we had a D&D group going for years. And I destroyed the whole world, unfortunately, by basically letting the demons loose on the prime material plane, and they flooded everything and destroyed every powerful character that was there, including all of us, which were not powerful, but destroyed everything, the whole planet. And so that happened in 91, I believe, 1991. So it's like the end of 1992. So it's like another like a whole year almost past that point. And we start thinking about some ideas for our next game. We just finished a game right after Wolfenstein, was a prequel to Wolfenstein called Spear of Destiny, used the Wolfenstein engine and everything. And then John was doing some tests on the Wolfenstein engine to make a better Wolfenstein engine. Like, what's our next game going to look like? What can we do with that Wolfenstein engine, make it cooler? So he experimented with that engine. We called it the Wolfenstein Plus engine. And he just like hit a dead end. It's just like that data structure that represented the world was too limiting for the things he wanted to do, because everything was 90-degree walls. And if you haven't played games since the 70s, you would know at that point that every game that was a 3D game or a maze game was 90-degree walls for every game. There was no such thing as a game in 3D that didn't have 90-degree walls. They all did. And it was basically a genre of game just called maze games. And so Wolfenstein was a maze game, and so was Spear of Destiny, and so was Hover Tank 1, and so was Catacomb 3D. They're all maze games, just in 3D. So when he's coming up with the ideas for the next game, he saw how limiting the data structure for Wolfenstein was, and he's just like, I got to get rid of this and start brand new. What can I do? So he came up with a really good data structure. I know this programming talk. But he came up with a really great way to represent the world that would allow for a game that looked way cooler than Wolfenstein. And so he started doing some experiments around November of 92, and we had a meeting about like, okay, new game, and John brought up the idea, what if we had a game that was basically like the end of the D&D campaign where it's just demons are flooded through and they're killing our Marines or something like that. And so Tom's like, yeah, okay, that's really cool. That's a really good idea. How about it's on Phobos, and we're doing science experiments? And so this is what Tom does. He invents a universe in like 5 minutes. So it was already designed. and so it was like, okay, let's do that. And John had seen The Color Money the night before, and in that movie, Tom Cruise basically is this awesome pool shark, and he has a pool stick basically called Doom. And so after seeing that scene in the movie, John's like, we could call it Doom, and I'm like, there's no game called Doom. All right, we have to do it. Like this is perfect. So we decided we're going to call it Doom, and it's going to be demons taking over everything, and we're going to be space marines out at a base on Phobos, and there's science experiments. And Tom's like, what's the company going to be called that's doing it? And what countries own this stuff? Is it just the U.S.? So he's really filling out the world as fast as he can. And he's writing a thing called the Doom Bible, which is just a design document for Doom. And so he makes that in November of 92. And John's experimenting with the tech and things that it could do. And so we go into the Christmas, our two-week Christmas vacation, already knowing what we're going to make as soon as we get back. And one of the important things, we get back into the office and we're like, okay, now we're going to make this game. We saw how well Wolfenstein was when we took all the time that we needed to make a great game, and we weren't on a schedule. It worked out really well. We spent double the amount of time normal. we used 4 months instead of 2 months. So we're like, no time limit. And I said, let's make the best thing that we can possibly imagine playing. We've never done this before in a game. Try and make something that, like, can you come up with something that's even cooler? That goes in this game. So it was like, this is the only game that we ever, even Quake, no games past that, did we ever say, this has to be the best thing we can imagine playing on a computer. So that's what we started making, and we didn't know what it was going to look like. We had no idea. We just knew that we were going to try making it, whatever it was. We knew the idea of the game, but what would it turn out to be? If you make games all the time, you know that initial idea is not what you see on the screen after years of work. Hopefully it's approximate, and it's close, but so many things happen during development. Better ideas happen. Things can't work the way that don't work the way that you would hope for, so you have to come up with different design ideas, that kind of stuff. And with Doom, we did hit a lot of roadblocks while making Doom, because this tech was very demanding on a 386, is what we were still using back then. Very demanding on a 386-33. It was going to take up more memory, so it was going to be a 4 megabyte memory game. It was the first game that we made that went over a megabyte. So it was the first 32-bit game that we'd made. And the look of the world, the data structure that John made could allow anything, but when we started making levels, we're still making very Wolfenstein style levels, because that's all that ever happened in games at that time. There was nothing other than that. So it was really hard to break out of that mental design space that we've only seen examples of 90-degree walls. So one day, when Tom had just kind of hit a wall, creative block, he knew that this was not the next level. Like, the levels were not the next thing. It was, yes, it looks better than Wolfenstein, but it's not a new paradigm shift. It's not like a revolution. So I just said, I'm going to play around with the editor. I just finished making like a real early version of the editor to use this data structure to make our levels, and so I just said, I'm going to work on it. And I just, in my office, I'm just thinking, what do I want to look at? What do I want to see when I'm looking at this game? I'm playing around with how I can draw lines and how I can, make different heights and different, darkness in rooms and light areas and contrast and, silhouetting characters and all that. And so I made just a room, like a lead-in into it, but mostly just one room. I just made this one room that was like nothing Tom had made, that was like the idea of was called abstract level design style. And I was just like, okay, this is it. And I brought everybody in the room, and they're just like, oh my God, yes. I'm like, that's the direction we need to go in. And everybody agreed, like, this is stuff no one's seen before in this one room. And like, the whole game has to look like this. Like, that's the challenge, is to make an entire game out of this kind of style. And if you looked at that room now, like the original one, it's like garbage compared to like Doom looked like when it shipped. But it was like breaking out of that wall to show a new way to go down that path. And the final room is still in the game in E1M2, and it's the game after the very beginning when you go up the stairs to the right and you go down that long lift into the dark room. That's the room that I made, but it didn't have the lift or any of that stuff before. You just came in at the bottom, but with the lift and fireballs coming at you in the dark and everything, it was super dramatic, and it ended up, it was something like nobody had ever seen before. And but that was the beginning of, like, now we have really cool looking levels in games that are realistic and lifelike, and they're like reality. But before Doom, everything was just mazes, 90-degree mazes. So that was one of the biggest things to happen in Doom. And then the other one was just the speed up of rendering the levels, because there was so much data on the screen, and these levels were really huge. And when a level, a whole game level is in memory, how does the computer know what it should draw and not draw any more of? Because you could draw the entire level every frame and barely move. You can barely turn your head. You need to have a way of drawing only the walls and stuff that you're looking at, and not one pixel more. And that's called culling, and culling is a really complex problem. It's more complex than putting dots on the screen. You don't put dots on the screen anymore, but back then we had to put every dot on the screen. But culling is like, how can you quickly determine what only gets drawn on the screen to speed up the rendering of a level? And so John had one method of doing it, and it actually was not as fast as it should be. And I created a level design that basically broke his algorithm. And so he's like, okay, I need to come up with something totally different. I can't use this data structure. So he started reading a whole bunch of like computer science papers, and he came upon a thing called the binary space partition that was invented at AT&T Labs. And it's not even for making levels fast. It's about culling back faces on 3D models. Like, how do you just see the face of a model, or the side of a model if you're rotating a model in 3D? How do you only see the polygons that are facing you and don't draw anything on the back? And this algorithm was a way to look at the model before you even have it on the screen, and crunch all this data to represent from any point that you're looking at the model what you should see without even doing any calculation. It's just automatic data structure. So he came up with a way of taking this algorithm and applying it to an entire Doom level. So anywhere that you're standing in a Doom level and anywhere that you're rotating and looking at, what should be drawn is just automatically in memory. It already knows exactly what to draw. And as you're turning, it's revealing only the other things that you should draw, and it's pre-calculated for the entire level. So he figured out this really amazing new thing, which is still used today from Doom 1993. So that was another massive move forward for the industry, was the movement, that was the creation of that. But then all of the sound effects and like the way that whole game was designed was it was like one of the scariest games anyone had ever played, because you're activating monsters and hearing them in the background and you don't know where they're at, and it's dark and it's scary and you're just trying to survive, and everything takes a lot of ammo and anyway, it was really fun making that game, and it was a lot of like slamming into little walls and then really big walls. But at the very end of it, like, it was the first game to have multiplayer, like fast multiplayer. You couldn't put Wolfenstein connected to another Wolfenstein or Commander Keen or anything we'd made before. And we actually, unbelievably, in January when we began making Doom, because we knew what we were going to make, we put out a press release that said this will be the best game in the world ever made. I can't believe we did that, but we did, and we even listed everything that was going to be in the game, like telling all the competition, this is what we're doing, go ahead, do it, you know. We basically told everyone what we're going to do, multiplayer, and it's going to be open for everybody to mod this game, which also was not, at that time, a really big thing. It was in the 70s. Modding was huge in the 70s, but in the 80s, when it got to microcomputers, modding was like not really a big thing at all, because everyone was copy protecting their games and they just didn't want them even copied. So nothing was really open. But with shareware and we're giving stuff away, modding made a lot of sense for us to put in Doom. So modding was another really massive part of the game, to design it so people could actually change the game and make it their own. And then multiplayer, we had that on the list, and then it was around October, and I'm like, oh no, we haven't put multiplayer in the game. And if you know how to write an engine nowadays, you write it from day one with multiplayer. You don't go, oh, the engine's done. Oh, wait a minute, we need to put multiplayer in. But that's what we did. And we used a method called peer-to-peer, which is like the only way that you can retrofit multiplayer onto a current game. And so me and Sandy Peterson came on the team in August. We had to go through all the levels, and we had to put, basically co-op start points, deathmatch, spawn points, all of the extra ammo and health for co-op. All of the deathmatch only weapons, you name it. We had to like go through every one of the 27 levels in Doom and make them work in multiplayer, and we had to test all of them over and over and over again, because we just added this really late. It only took maybe a week to get all of the multiplayer code working perfectly in Doom, but it took the rest of the time to like get all of the data in there to for everybody else. From people playing any level, they'd be able to play it in co-op, in single player, and in deathmatch. And yes, we kept our promise and put it out there. That was the other revolution that Doom spawned, was everybody was buying network cards and cable. And that's when LAN parties started. That's when people are starting to now lug these heavy computers and these heavy monitors from their home to their friend's home, and they would just stay all weekend and do that. And I had mentioned to somebody earlier, there is a book that's called LAN Party that's going to be coming out that's all about the 90s LAN party craze that happened.
Amazing. I mean, it's crazy to think that you told everyone you're going to make the best game ever made, and you pretty much did. And you did it at 26.
Software.
I mean, what was it like being in the middle of the Doom whirlwind as it was happening? I mean, it blew up, arguably bigger than even you could have imagined, right?
Yeah, it was bigger than we could even see. I mean, it affected everything, but we like immediately started working again on the next game. So the only way that we kind of knew what was going on was we go into the computer store that's just down the street, and we see there are 10 different boxes of Doom on the shelf. It's the same, like people were putting shareware boxes in the store, which we actually, we masterminded that. because we're like, all we care about is distribution of this shareware copy everywhere people can get it. And at the time, sure, people were on modems. Not everybody, though. People were on modems, and maybe you'd go somewhere to see that you can download a game called Doom. But where people shopped in the 90s was like the way they got the games was in the store. And stores started to carry shareware. They started to come up with CDs full of shareware, you know? And because Doom was such a big game, we went to the store and we found some of the biggest publishers of shareware that would put stuff in the store, and contacted them and said, take our game, put it in a box. Don't charge more than $9, and we don't want any of it. You just keep it. Just put it in the store. And they're like, yes, it's the best game ever made, right? That's what they were saying. So you would go in the store and you would see 10 different boxes of Doom. And it's really like, it's the same game in every one of those boxes, but what box was coolest? That's the one that you're going to buy usually, or you just buy all of them, because now people are collecting all those boxes. But like we saw that the impact was there. Like it was in all the stores, and we were working with a company that wanted to distribute Doom 2, and so they basically said, you know, we're going to sell millions of copies, like guaranteed, not a problem. And we're just like, okay, that would be insane. But we were working on Doom 2, so we're just like making Doom 2. We spent 8 months on Doom 2, and when Doom 2 came out, it was like when Super Mario 3 came out. So when Super Mario 3 came out, it was one of the most anticipated games in history, and when in the United States, they sold a lot of those games at a store called Toys R Us. So it was like a toy store that carried all console games. And there were like Babbage's and Electronic Boutique and some other places like that. But that was like the place that everyone went to because they had a massive inventory because the stores were huge. You were lucky, like you knew you would get a game if you went to the giant store because they would have so many copies that if you went early, you would hopefully get one. There were so many copies. It was in such demand for Super Mario 3 at Toys R Us that they just unloaded the pallet and took the top off and ran away. And they didn't put it on the shelf. It was gone. Like within an hour, everything is gone. And they did the same thing with Doom 2. They take it to the store. They just inside the door. They didn't even bother putting it in the game section. They put it in the door, took the top off the pallet, and that was gone. And when we saw that, we're like, oh my God, this was like a Super Mario 3, which is kind of how all this started. And so it was, yeah, so we knew that was huge. But then it's like, oh, we just sold millions of copies. All right.
Let's buy a Ferrari.
Cool.
Yeah, so then of course you have had mega hit after mega hit, and Quake is the next game that you make that again revolutionizes the industry. But of course it was a bit more of a difficult development cycle, right?
Yeah.
What was it like working on Quake?
Quake was, after Doom 2, we basically are thinking about Quake, but there's so much stuff going on with Doom. And at the beginning of Doom 2, I knew like we have a great engine now. Like this Doom engine is like the best engine that you can make a game with. Very complex development system setup because anyone on the team that's a level designer or a programmer needs 2 computers to make a game like Doom. You have to have what's called a next step workstation. They were $10,000 for this computer. It's like what Mac OS 10 is, or 11, 12 now. But that's what we were using Mac OS 10 back in 1992. It was like space. It was like going into the future. So when we made Doom, we used a really specialized development system, and then we had a PC to just run Doom. Like we did no Doom development on a PC. We made it on a workstation, and on the PC, we're connected to a network drive. We just copy Doom and just run it on the PC to make sure it runs fast and it's fun, and that's the target for it. So I found a company called Raven where we were living when we were in Wisconsin for 6 months, unfortunately, and it was freezing there. But while up there, I found this company called Raven that was a game company, and I kept in touch with them since 1991, and finally, at the beginning of '94, they were now ready to make a game with us. I'd been trying over and over again, but the timing wasn't right. So I finally got them to, like, we will fund the game, we'll pay to have that company develop a game, we buy all the computers, and they have a team working on this all day for as long as it takes. So 1994, while we're making Doom 2, they're making Heretic, and they're using everything that we gave them. And I told them, you use all the Doom weapons, you make them look different. The balance is perfect on these weapons, so make it look cool. It's Dungeons and Dragons, it's medieval. That was their style, and that's how Heretic turned out. And then so at the beginning of 1995, I have them start working on the sequel to Heretic called Hexen. So I designed that game, and I'm working with them on that. The amount of stuff that happened when Doom came out, like the hint guides, the novels, the movie deal stuff, like the amount of stuff coming in was huge. Deathmatching was huge. There were tournaments already in 1994. There was the beginning of esports starting in 1994 because of Doom. People were looking at buying up grocery stores and just clearing them out and making them LAN centers to have tournaments. Kind of like, it's like the new bowling. You know, everybody goes in this big place, except it's dark, and everybody's hooked up to these four station, and I played at some of these places too, played tournaments at some of these places that were just set up really, really well. And so dealing with all this incoming stuff, in addition to another company coming down and starting to work on a game called Strife, there was so much stuff going on that the end of 1994 and the beginning of 95 was just unbelievable amounts of work. And starting on Quake, the ideas for Quake started at the end of 1994, and they were based off our D&D campaign, but based off a character and a group in the D&D campaign. And so one character's name is Quake, and he's basically like Thor. He's like, but a more badass Thor. So I think Thor's pretty awesome, but like this guy was unstoppable. And so we're gonna make a game that's medieval. For us, we'd never done a medieval game before, so we're gonna do a medieval game with a hammer. Instead of shooting guns, no more pew pew, we're gonna get a hammer, and this hammer is you're gonna smash stuff into a pulp, you're gonna slam the ground and have huge, area effect attacks. You're gonna be going through, like say World of Warcraft, but for us probably dingier and darker. Going through a world like that and spending more time killing each thing instead of just like a shotgun blast. It's like you're fighting maybe 2-3 things at once, but you're like, it's hard work, but you're pretty badass. So we'll see. We didn't know what it was going to look like, but it was something that we were going to try and go for. But the technology jump with Quake was massive. It was bigger than Wolfenstein to Doom. It was huge. And we massively underestimated the amount of time that was going to take. Because when we were working on, let's say, Commander Keen, that was like a week's worth of work to make an engine that we could start making a game on. And with Wolfenstein, it was 2 weeks when we had an engine that we could start making a game on. Even though John's working on the engine, beyond that point, we were like able to make the game because the engine was going really at a good speed, and the speed really dictates how much you're going to put in the view of the player, so we wouldn't have to redo everything later. Doom was probably about a month, and we had an engine that we could make a game around. So Quake, maybe it's 2 months. We'll double Doom, Nope, it was a year. And it was a year of such insanely hard work. We had to have 4 programmers on that engine for a year. So John was working on it, and only after a couple months, he's just like, I need to get someone here that is incredible to help, because back then there were no 3D video cards. Like, there's no such thing as a GPU. There was every game that we had made, even up to Quake, we had to put every pixel on the screen individually, and we had to do it at 60 frames a second. And in 3D, calculating in 3D, that's a lot of work. And that takes a massive amount of super optimized code. And if you want to know, if you're a programmer or you want to be a programmer, you want to know what it was like, what the hardware was like in 1992, and what we had to do to use that hardware to make those games, there are books out right now that are like the game engine black book, Wolfenstein 3D, and Doom, and the Quake one's being finished off right now. But they go into massive detail. What is the hardware of 1993, and how did we use that hardware to make this game go this fast? And it's a lot of work. And Quake was like Everest. It was so hard, because in Quake you can look in any direction, And those calculations, those are full 3D calculations. In Doom, you couldn't tilt the screen like this. That removes so many calculations and makes it so much easier. And that's why people were calling it a 2.5D engine, because we could do so many 2D calculations without having to hit 3D that we could make that game go really fast. But you can't get away from it in Quake. Quake was full 3D in look in any direction, and it had to be faster than everybody's, and it also had to look better than every game out that was 3D. So we had to have a completely different lighting model that no one had ever seen before, where if you made a really cool thing that a light could go in, like you have a cool fancy sconce or whatever, and you put up the light behind it, the light would shine out, but everywhere that there was a blocking on it, you would see that shadow on every wall. And that works for everything in every single room, and it pre-calculates all this light, so you have just all this cool shadow play on the walls, and yeah, it looked better than anything. But that took so much work to make that happen that the dev team was just getting burned out making level pieces and making them to test the engine, and then the engine goes faster or the architecture of the engine changes. And then a lot of stuff has to get rewritten, not just the code in the engine, but the levels also would have to be remade. So they basically stopped making anything extensive because it was going to get thrown away. So they're getting frustrated. I wasn't, because I was working on everything else that was dealing with Doom's world, the whirlwind and tornado of Doom happening, plus the other games that I was running. And I had to write Quake Ed so the dev team could make levels in Quake, and I could experiment too. So we're making levels for the first time in 3D, which is totally different than Doom type stuff, and having to set the bar for it. Like, how do we know that this couldn't be made in Doom, other than lighting? So it's like, well, you need to be able to see really cool stuff on the ceiling, and you need to see under stuff in the room, and you have to have puzzles that could never have been made in Doom. So we had all kinds of rules that we had to follow for each one of the levels to make it so everything that you experienced in Quake felt like it was nothing that you'd ever seen before. And so ramping up the design, just understanding of the team, that took time as well. But like the artists were having to create 3D models for the first time using a Silicon Graphics Indigo workstation, and we were using Next Step workstations to create Quake. And we're also making it on DOS. So we're like for the art team, 3 different computers to make this game. It was really, really complex. So so it took a year to just get the technology to a point where we could actually make a game. And that was really hard on the dev team. And by the time we got to the point where we could actually start making the game, they did not want to experiment with game design anymore. Like, oh, another year? Really? So they were not into experimenting anymore. They just wanted to just like use this engine and just make a shooter. And so for me, that was really disappointing because I wanted to make this completely new game. For me, it wasn't like, oh, Quake's engine is a really great FPS engine. Quake's engine was a great 3D engine for a 3D game, which could be anything. And I wanted to experiment making something different in 3D. Hence the idea that everyone on the dev team knew Quake was about. But when it got to the end of the development cycle just for the engine, and they didn't want to go forward with the rest of it, experimenting in a 3D engine, making a totally different type of gameplay than we've been making with Doom, they just weren't into it. So I was just like, okay, this is not where I want to be anymore, because I want to keep on experimenting. So I basically said, all right, I'll design this to be an FPS. We'll put Doom-style weapons in, I'll change it up a little bit, but that's what we'll do. And so I planned on leaving id Software after Quake was finished. And I talked to Tom Hall, and he said, yeah, he'll join up and we'll start a new company after leaving after Quake. But while making Quake, at that point, which they're all burned out, we now go into crunch mode. Like, they're burned out, and this is the first official id crunch mode. Before, when we used every hour of the day to make games, that wasn't crunch mode, that was fun mode. But when you're forced to work, then it's crunch mode. But they basically had to decide we had to do this to get this game done before the next Christmas. It could not take another year. And the only way to make another game, to get this game done before a year, maybe hopefully by the middle of the year, is to just spend every minute, meaning 7 days a week, 12 hours a day minimum. And we started that in December. And we all moved into one room that was basically a destroyed room because we just started taking over the floor of this the building that we were in. And this was like an accounting firm's room, and they just like wiped out every wall. There's like wires hanging from the ceiling. Most of the tiles are missing. It was vacuumed and all that, but we just put tables up against all the walls, put all our computers in there, and because we had offices before, we're all gonna get this done in the war room together as fast as possible. So I sat right next to Carmack, and I had my design team to my left, and John had his programming team to his right, and that's how we worked to make Quake as fast as we could. And I immediately designed everything about the game. Here's every weapon. Here's where all the levels people had kind of experimented with. Here's where they go in order. Here's how we're splitting this up into episodes. We're going to do 4 episodes instead of 3 because we have found out that 4 episodes will sell even better. So yeah, I redesigned the whole thing, and then we just executed that as fast as we could. And the game was released on June 22nd of 1996. So we got the game done in half a year. In crazy mode, and because we were so crazy making the game that when it was time to make a beta for the game, I was up for 38 hours straight to get a beta done and to get that thing uploaded and then go to sleep for a little bit. And then when the game was finished, the team was so destroyed that nobody even came into work anymore, and I basically came in by myself and put it together and uploaded Quake shareware, and people came in after a few days. So yeah, the team was basically broken at that point because we just worked in. It was building Everest basically, and yeah, it was really, really hard.
And that unfortunately was when you left id Software.
Yeah.
Rather than me ask you more questions, I think now's a great point to ask the audience to field a few, if that's okay. So if you raise your hands, I'll point to someone and then we'll fire away. Gentleman here.
Obviously, the modding community since original Doom is still kept alive till this day.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the new RTX Doom with ray tracing and voxel Doom? Have you played with it? What do you think about it?
Well, I haven't played the RTX or the voxels. I've seen them.
Yeah.
It looks really amazing. RTX Quake looks really Quake 2 looks really great. Obviously, that's just like better rendering. It looks really good. It's really cool eye candy. The levels are still the same geometry. It's cool to see the Cyber Demon in Voxel Doom. If everyone knows what I'm talking about.
I've seen the video, haven't you?
Yeah. And that would have been really cool to do, back then. I think even when Ken Silverman, who was the programmer of the build engine that was used for Duke Nukem 3D and Shadow Warrior and stuff, he put voxels in his engine way back then, and it looked really, really good. And it's just too bad that we didn't do that in Doom, but somebody finally did after 27, 28 years. Yeah. And it looks really good. It looks cool. It's like brings those sprites to life, and you don't have to have this thing that doesn't look realistic. But yeah, it's cool because we put the source code out there for our games for people to learn from and to extend into the future. There's been new versions of Doom, in Quake since we made those games. People have taken that code and made it work on the latest OS, whether it's Linux or it's a toaster or it's a pregnancy test or a Tesla or an ATM or Doom runs on everything. And I think there's even a URL, doesn't-run-doom.com, where if a new piece of tech comes out, they put Doom on it first because it's such portable code. The inner renderer for the vertical span splitter that draws the screen is in C, which can just be compiled, and compilers nowadays are really good, and you can just have the game running just without even doing any assembly language, and just make it work on any platform. So it's a really nice generic release. It was a Linux release, I believe, of the source code.
Cool. Gentleman over here. Yeah, go for it.
I think that obviously, I would say that Wolfenstein being quite an elephant in the room, with the theme that it is, obviously with it being sort of controversial, would we say, did that cause any problems for you, like any sort of problems for you being the theme that it is, or
Not at all. Wolfenstein was not controversial for us. It's funny because when we're coming up with the idea for Wolfenstein happened, and then a little later, while we're still making the game, it's like, yeah, you know what? We could have picked anything. We could have done terrorism. We could have picked terrorists. I'm like, that would have been a really bad idea, because they could actually kill us right now. But like, there's no Nazis running around. This is 1992, and so we're like, yeah, we're pretty safe. You know, everybody knows that was bad. So, you know, and the funny thing is like a lot of the emails that we got later, which were like CompuServe or mail in the postal mail, like that's the kind of mail that happened back then. We had like POWs that were in Vietnam that their flashbacks were cured from Wolfenstein because they could like face their fears in the game and overcome flashbacks. And there were stories of Jewish boys feeling like they were getting revenge for their ancestors by mowing down Nazis. I was like, I never saw that coming, but you know, all right. And the funny thing is like, we're just Americans who obviously don't believe in the rest of the world. So like, the United States is everything. So like, is it going to sell in Germany? Don't care. Like, we're just going to make a game that we want to play. But yes, it went everywhere, and in Germany it sold under the counter like crazy. Not supposed to have it in Germany, but everyone had it.
Brilliant. Anybody else? Front row here.
I was lucky enough to be born in the 80s, and at your age, about 19, what advice would you give my 6-year-old who was born in 2016 who wants to code and create his own game?
I'd say if you want to learn how to code, there's different ages that you would start using different technologies to learn in. Really, really early technologies would be something like Scratch, like for your kid. Definitely Scratch gets them thinking logically about how logic works and how sequential execution works. And you can make games in Scratch. You know, it's very visual and it's easy. And then you start getting into things like Game Maker, where you're using a development environment to make something that is a lot of drag and drop, you know, and some programming. And then you kind of graduate into could be an engine where you're just writing all the code, and there's an engine there behind the scenes that will draw everything to the screen. And I kind of I say Solar 2D right now, solar2d.com. If you want to just write code, and it's in Lua, which is actually one of the easiest languages to learn how to program in. You don't have to deal with memory management like you do in C and C++. It's very, very fast. Lua is a very fast language. Solar 2D is a really fast SDK. It's called an SDK software development kit. It'll deliver games on desktop, Mac OS, on Windows, obviously, on Android, on iOS. Switch is coming soon. HTML in a web browser. So it delivers, and it's free. Just download it and you just learn how to program. And you're just writing really simple code, and like even in one line, you can get a whole screen up on your phone, just in one line of code. So it's really, really nice. And then if you're going to get serious about game development because you've done some of these Solar 2D things, then you want to use, say, Unreal 5, Unreal Engine. There's a lot to learn there, but it's what everybody uses to make really fast FPS games. If you don't want to make an FPS, you can use Unity. But Unity has a lot of issues because the people that make Unity don't make games. And if you want to make games and you're using a tool that wasn't made to make games, you know, I mean, they're making it to make games. They're hoping people use it to make games. They're not going to make games with it. But Unreal is made to make games. The company that makes Unreal makes Fortnite. You know, they make Gears of War. Like, they use their engine. It's called dog fooding. They eat their dog food. So it's an engine that is made for those games, and it performs incredibly well. And it's also very visual. If you want to program in Unreal, you use a thing called blueprints, which is like visual, like little dialogues that they're just kind of dragging connections between objects and in controlling logic flow depending on what's coming into it. And if you know how to program in C++, you can kind of see the C++ and visually in what you're looking at in the blueprints. And then when you want to go super fast, you just change those blueprints into C++, and boom, you have a commercial game. So yeah, Unreal 5 is like the ultimate, but there's all these other steps depending on your understanding of programming. But all programming builds on itself. Like if you start using GameMaker, if you did anything in Scratch, you will use what you knew in Scratch. And logically, just knowing logic, you'll use it in GameMaker, and in GameMaker, if you did any kind of programming, you'll understand how to use Solar 2D, and in Lua is very simple, but you'll learn how to program there, and then UE uses everything that you've ever learned. So that's how you start.
Perfect. Gentleman in the corner there.
Yeah, as a university student, what would you say about mental health programmers, especially procrastination?
Oh, I couldn't hear that one. What? I couldn't hear it. What was the question?
About students' mental health and like being a programmer.
It's being a programmer and mental health, like how do you keep having good mental health while you're a programmer?
Yeah.
Is it because of all the programming that we were doing? Do you mean like the hours, the number of hours, or was it something else?
Probably like the hours.
I couldn't understand that. Was it?
Yeah, so avoiding hours and procrastination, overcoming the barriers of procrastination when you're an up-and-coming game developer.
Oh yeah. You gotta want to make games pretty bad to overcome some of the walls that come up in front of you. I remember when I learned BASIC, I was just barely learning BASIC. I probably had maybe a year of BASIC, and this is not at home. And I wanted to make real fast games. And my friend who introduced me to the mainframe computers, we went to a store one day, and he showed me, you want to make a game like this? And he's showing me this game that was just like, it was Defender, except on a computer. And I'm like, hell yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Look at how fast it moves. And so he like, beep, he breaks into the monitor, and he lists the game, and he's just like, that's what you need to learn. I'm like, what? That's just a bunch of numbers. They were hexadecimal numbers. If you don't know what hexadecimal is, it's a number system. Instead of going from 0 to 9 like decimal, it's 0 to F. 0 to 9, and then A, B, C, D, E, F, and then it's 10, 11, 12, 19, 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, 1F, and then 20. 20 is 32 in decimal. And so like it's just another number. There's an infinite number of number systems. But hexadecimal is the way that 8-bit computers represent numbers, and they still do today. But he just showed me a wall of just hexadecimal numbers, 0, 8, A, B, D, F. Like, the whole screen is full of them. And he's like, you have to program in that. I'm like, no way. Well, I guess I got to do it, you know. and it took, you know, probably another year and a half, something like that, before I could actually understand what that was. And now I could look at a hex dump of stuff like that and tell you every single instruction and what was going on in there. But to get to that point, you have to run into so many walls and like, where do I get the next piece of data or information that lets me understand that next thing? Because the steps of understanding, the lower the step, the faster the understanding. So you need small steps, and you got to find the right book that gets you to that next step. So, you know, the like procrastination is a lot of times with programmers, sometimes it's not just the programming part, but it's also the concept part, like to come up with an idea to program, because you want to program something, so you have to come up with an idea. But what if you don't feel like you're creative enough to do that? You know, you have to like be inspired by something else. So look at other stuff that you can use to get better at programming. So a lot of my early games was not me creating brand new things, but me going, I will take that game, Threshold, and I'll make my version of Threshold, which is a horrible version of Threshold, but it at least gets me to learning how to code, you know, and I will never make Threshold. I mean, I could make a better game than Threshold now, but like, I never got to the point where I would actually get good enough to do that, because I wouldn't want to use the same idea over and over and over again. I'll use another idea and try and do that. And as I'm learning, maybe I'm getting closer to the real thing, but it's just practice. So if you feel like you can't come up with an idea, just take someone else's idea and see if you can even make it. So one of the things when people ask about learning how to make games, I'm just like, just try to make Pac-Man. Like, pay attention to Pac-Man and how Pac-Man looks on the screen, how it sounds, how it works. It's so hard to make Pac-Man. Right now, try to replicate Pac-Man perfectly, even as a programmer, it's hard to do. It's very detail-oriented. And that game was masterfully created in 1980, and it changed the world. And even replicating it today with all of today's engines is a lesson in game development that you'll never forget. It is hard to do. So, even something from 40 years ago is going to be hard to execute at the same level that they executed when it came out. But you just got to keep on, you got to just keep on trying to get to that point. Like when we couldn't make our levels run fast enough because we couldn't cull fast enough. Where are the culling algorithms that exist? We're not going to try and make our own again. We're going to try and do it, in a way that computer scientists have solved. And you find that, and then you figure out, how do I even make that work? How do I understand how to even read this paper with the math in it? And then how do I even make that happen in computer instructions in a different language, So it can all be done. I think one of the things that has helped me get through everything is like, well, if another human did this, there's no reason I can't do it. Like, why can someone else do something and I can't? That doesn't make any sense to me. I should be able to understand everything. It's just, you just got to find the step. So that's what drove me from the very beginning was, there's a wall of hex. Someone knows that, I should be able to know that. So I need to figure out what are the steps to understanding that, and that's how I did it. So you just got to just be really just, you got to want to do it. And with the hours, I spent as much hours as I wanted to learning and making stuff, because like programming is super rewarding because you put a bunch of effort in and you see it on the screen, and that is so fast, such a fast iterative cycle compared to anything else that you can do. You can draw on a piece of paper, that's fast. That's why there's so many artists, because that feedback loop is instant. And programming is a little slower, but it's really, really fast for the amount of complexity that you're putting into a computer. It's amazing. So that's addictive. That's like, oh my God, I got a character on the screen, and then it's like, oh my God, it's moving. Now it's jumping. And it's like, why would you stop? I'm going to keep on going. Okay, it's 4 in the morning. I got to go to sleep. But when I wake up, I'm going to keep on doing this, So when you're at the very beginning of learning all this stuff, you're like, you don't want to stop. My parents had to make me go to bed. I had to like put blankets under the door so they couldn't see the light, unplug the speaker from the computer so they can't hear it, type as light as I possibly can so they don't hear the keyboard. I did as much stuff as I could to stay on that computer.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure you could ask... There's more hands up. We'll do one more question because we've got some deathmatch to play after this. So I'm going to go with the gentleman over there. He had his hand up for a while. Yep.
While you were creating the original Duke games, did you ever consider how big of a pop culture icon it become?
We had not ever considered how big a pop culture icon Doom would become, but we did know we were going to make the best game in the world when we made it. But then our next game would beat it into the ground. Like that's how we thought about every game. It was like, all right, the next game is going to beat this game down so hard. And then we make the next game. Yes, it did. No one wants to play that old game. Next game's going to ruin this game. So every game was always like, how do we destroy this game? Make the best thing that we can, and then try and ruin it with the next game. But we didn't know that we had gotten to a level there where it was just going to live for decades. Like we had no idea that. We knew that some of the ideas that were in the game were really powerful, like multiplayer and modding were massive, and like letting people connect and letting people modify the games and then releasing the source code, that made the game immortal. It was a really good game too. Like if it wasn't that good of a game, like no one is modding Ping or Pong today, right? It's not worth it. And not even that many people are modding Duke Nukem because they wasted their time getting that source code out. But I think if Duke Nukem source code had been released a lot earlier, a lot more people would be modding Duke today because that was an excellent game. But Doom was just like this perfect engine that for what you put into level creation, you got so much more out of it as a player. Because the game had, the engine had diminished lighting in it, so lighting got dark automatically in the distance. The game is auto-spooky, so you can make these levels that are just scary, it just automatically. And that just made the game really fun to make levels for, because it's like, okay, I'm just going to put all these monsters, I'm going to make the light level this. People are terrified now. You didn't have to put lots and lots of extra things in levels like you need to do nowadays. You didn't have to do that back then because there was no expectation of any of that detail back then. So as long as it was better than Wolfenstein, everyone was hooked on it. And it was really, really good. But it was at this perfect engine design point, and that is like very hard to try and replicate that again. But yeah, it was we were just really lucky when we got that. I always feel like that game was going to exist. Someone was going to make that game. We just found it first, and it's like it's almost like it's a fated game to happen, or the idea and all the things around it. We just chiseled the rock differently than somebody else would have, but it was going to happen. But yeah, we didn't know that it was going to last so long, but I love it.
And now we're going to go and play it. So if you could put your hands together for John, that would be great. Thank you, John.
Thank you.